AI can write, code, summarize, and analyze, but can it also make us richer? Or will it take our jobs, widen inequality, and concentrate power in the hands of a few tech giants? Those questions are no longer theoretical. AI is already entering homes, offices, companies, and economies, including here in Europe. So today we are asking what this technology could mean for our jobs, the economy, and Europe's future. You're listening to Europe Matters, the podcast by the European Central Bank, where we unpack the stories, ideas, and decisions shaping Europe's economy. My name is Stefania Secola. I am at the ECB Forum on Central Banking in Sintra, Portugal. And today I'm in conversation with Ronnie Chatterji, Chief Economist at OpenAI. Ronnie, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. And OpenAI is a household name, I would say, since ChatGPT went mainstream last year. Since when are you working there, by the way?
I started 2 years ago, about in 2024, at OpenAI. At that time, ChatGPT was a household name, but I didn't know that they would need a chief economist, and so it was a surprise to me to have that opportunity. I asked a lot of questions. I've answered some of those questions, but I've uncovered even more interesting questions in economics since I've joined. It's been really a journey of a lifetime.
Yeah, and indeed, an economist at ChatGPT, one would wonder. But what is exactly your role? And I have also another question, which is, how do you use AI yourself?
Oh, wow. Okay, well, let me tell you about my role, and then I can tell you how I use AI, and happy to talk more about that if it's useful. So in terms of my job, I have a fantastic team of economists, data scientists, program managers with a wide variety of backgrounds. A lot of them have worked in central banking or in the government, in econ policy type roles. And it really helps to have that context because our team has to work across a wide variety of areas. The first area that we spend a lot of time on is the impact of AI on the job market and economic growth. This is the bread and butter for any economist, and certainly for an AI economist. The questions that you will get when you're talking to people at a cocktail party or at a kid's birthday party are, what is AI going to do to the job market?
Yes.
Will it grow GDP? And so we have part of our team that is exclusively focused on that. The second piece we work on is enterprise adoption. I'm a former business school professor. I taught MBA students for most of my career. And I'm very interested in how organizations are adopting AI. And I think that many of the macro level effects on productivity that people are looking for are going to be downstream of really effective enterprise adoption. And so for me, that enterprise part of our work is incredibly important.
Okay.
The third part of our work is sort of thinking a little bit more sort of futuristically about what AGI looks like and how economics will be useful in understanding that world. There are big topics around recursive self-improvement, the ability of models to improve themselves, unleashing nonlinear growth effects and capabilities. That's something that economics and the traditional toolkit may be incomplete in studying, and so we need to come up with new ways to do it. And so part of my team is also really focused on those topics. So those are the three things we work on.
And we're going to unpack a bit around these topics because it's super, super broad, but it's exactly what we want to talk about. But before we go there, I'm really interested in you and how you use AI and agents, for example.
I started off using AI as a learning tool, and I think that is very popular on our platform for ChatGPT. A large percentage of use cases are for learning. And for me, it was both to deepen my understanding about economics, but also learn in new fields. But I have to say, some of the most interesting aha moments that happened for me were learning economics with ChatGPT.
Okay.
I think when you already have expertise in an area, you can ask great questions or better questions, and you can delve into the topics that are provided in a more interesting way. And so I've learned a ton about how research on AI is evolving from the economics perspective. I've learned about different fields in economics that I didn't study in my field exams. And I've also learned about how to talk about economics to wider audiences by working with ChatGPT, asking people or asking the model, how could I explain this with an example? How could I take this chart and make it into a story? These are things that really help me with how I use AI in my personal capacity.
But you read it at a very high level, right?
It is, and I think that's helped me ask good questions and learn a lot. And I think that is something we should return to, which is it's a complement to my expertise in the language of economics. And I think the question is it also good for developing expertise? And that's a question we can talk about in a little bit. I'd say on agents, I often delegate to my agent things that I used to do myself that I find to be very valuable, but very time consuming. We get a lot of messages in email, but we also have a platform called Slack, which is really popular in enterprise, where you might come up to hundreds of messages that people are sending you across myriad channels. It's very difficult to ingest all that information. And so I ask Codex, my agent of choice, to go spin up an agent to basically go read those messages, categorize them, and put them into a framework to help me answer them in priority order.
Okay.
This has helped me a ton in terms of deciding how to start my day. I've improved what Codex does by giving it feedback to what it produces. I've also even asked it to put it into a podcast or a song for me, which it can do. So I think that part has been really, really interesting in triaging work. The other thing it's really good for is we have sort of regular, they might be daily, weekly, monthly updates that we'd like to send around the company to let people know what the econ team is doing. And sometimes you'll be scrambling at the end of the month to figure out all the great things you've done. I'm sure you do this in your job too. Now we just have a very organized way for Codex to go look at all the things we've done, explain what kind of feedback and impact they've made internally already, and prioritize them and list them for people to say, here's the rundown of what we did this month. That's taken so much off my plate, and it's given me more cognitive space to actually think about new projects, which I think is really valuable.
I think you're giving lots of ideas to our listeners. And it's
I can do I can do more, but that's how I'm using it right now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I'm also very curious about OpenAI policies for using AI. Can you use whatever you want? I mean, can you use Claude or, I don't know, Gemini, whatever, or you are bound to use ChatGPT only?
Well, at work, we use ChatGPT and Codex. But in our personal lives, I mean, if you're an AI-pilled researcher, you have to use all the models and learn their benefits and their costs and how they're approaching different things. So I think people are going to use everything to learn kind of, the best use cases and how to inform their own thinking. But at work, we're using the OpenAI models.
Yeah, very interesting. And talking of firm adoption of AI, from your vantage point, what do you see happening? I mean, is it really genuinely and intensively used by firms more and more? And if so, can you define a sort of a pace or an adoption rate over time? So
Yes.
what do you see there?
When I first started at OpenAI in 2024, I think the race of AI adoption in the enterprise was defined by breadth and the number of users that you had. And so we were counting users and saying, okay, has this firm adopted, yes or no, a binary question? How many people in the firm are using AI? Now in 2026, the debate has moved and the metric has moved much more towards depth. Economists will recognize this as a version of the extensive margin versus the intensive margin. And I think using that depth measure has become much more interesting for me. Because at the end of the day, what enterprises are going to get out of AI has a lot to do with how deeply they're using it, not just how many people are typing, let's say, into ChatGPT at work.
Yeah.
And so I think the conversation for enterprise in terms of measuring adoption, let's certainly move beyond the 0-1. And when we do surveys of firms, it's often very binary. And look, given data availability, sometimes that's the best we can do. But then we have to look underneath the hood, inside the black box, and say how many people are using it. And now the next level, which our team is doing, is looking at the depth of use. And what that'll show you is there's a lot of heterogeneity, variation between users in the enterprise. And so what might look like two very similar firms are actually very different because of the intensity of how power users, those who are using the tool most intensely, are utilizing AI.
Maybe it's very obvious to you, but is there a wide difference by sector? I'm sure there are some sectors that are more AI prone, but others, they might not look like that. You already see they have a huge potential. And which are those?
So we endeavored to answer this question by creating a report that is released regularly now, every 3 months, called B2B signals, business-to-business signals. There's really hadn't been up to that point a good source of enterprise data that an individual, an analyst could track. And my dream was to have that data be able to be analyzed using Codex. And if you were making a presentation to your board and you needed a slide on how does my firm stack up in terms of AI usage to others in my industry, in finance, in tech, in professional services, in energy, in healthcare, you'd be able to create that slide with our data.
Yeah.
And so we've released that data, B2B signals, and what it shows is that sectors like finance, technology, professional services, which includes consulting, they tend to lead in terms of AI adoption as measured by token usage, which means they're the most intensive users of tokens. Healthcare is a really growing sector, as well as manufacturing. So those are probably two to watch going forward. I do think that industries that are highly regulated, that are basically sort of exposed in the way to the public sector through public funding, those are going to be ones that traditionally have been slower adopters of technology. But you are seeing healthcare as an emerging area for AI, and I think you'll see the same thing in some other sectors like energy and education as well. It's exciting to see that, and I think how AI is leveraged in those different sectors will tell us a lot about the productivity gains that could come.
Absolutely. And energy. We need lots of efficiency there, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
let's see what AI can bring. And geographically, what do you see US versus Europe or any other country you visited?
I've had the chance to visit, I think, almost 13 countries since joining OpenAI.
All right.
And there's a different story in each country. In Europe, where we sit today, there's a lot of variation across Europe in terms of how countries are using AI. We released a report that showed that the Netherlands is number 2 in terms of per capita usage of AI. We had some fun with that, and we mapped it to the ranking in FIFA for the national teams. And for Belgians, they are both number 9 in AI usage per capita and in FIFA. So maybe there's some correlation that could be explored in a further study. But there is a lot of variation within Europe. Eastern and Southern Europe and some third-party reports are behind other parts of Europe in terms of AI adoption. So we've been trying to look to understand what explains those patterns. I think one hint is that industry composition is different across different parts of Europe. Sure. You might have a very manufacturing, relatively heavy industry country like in Germany versus a service-oriented economy like in Portugal. Depending on where AI is being used and the use cases, that may imply different patterns. So we think that every country should have an AI readiness plan that reflects what their country's industrial composition, what their educational sector, what their capabilities and advantages are. And so that variation, I think, is going to drive a lot of interesting differences in AI readiness across countries.
And did you see or did you analyze any cultural element that really can explain these kind of differences?
We haven't done it formally, but I've noticed it as I've traveled around the world. In East Asia, in Japan and Korea, demographic differences, a lower immigration rate, this makes them think differently, I think, about how AI is going to be used in their economy. And there's less concern in those markets about sort of substitution in the labor market, frankly, because I think they see a lot of opportunities to expand and complement human knowledge in places like education, for example, where there may be a shortage of providers. And so I think they're also more comfortable with machines in their society being integrated, as you've seen if you've traveled to Seoul or Tokyo. So I think while I haven't analyzed it formally, I think there are big differences across the world, often driven by cultural attitudes towards technology. I also think stage of development matters. In countries that are growing fast in the emerging world, they are more likely to see AI as a game changer, to leapfrog the existing economic and political order and move their country up the league tables. I think in other parts of the world where there are more established industries, more traditional powers, there's more worry about the disruption. And I think that is a very natural thing that you see across countries, and if not cultural, reflects different political and economic realities.
And did you see anything from a social demographic point of view that can explain certain countries being forward and others being a bit behind?
I haven't seen this in terms of driving country adoption, but one thing we picked up very early was a apparent gender divide in the way people were using AI. We don't know your gender on ChatGPT, but in our study in 2025, we released a paper called How People Use ChatGPT. And we were able to infer gender from looking at the names and whether those names were basically associated with more likely a female or male name. And so as you think about sort of those questions, we found that the inferred male gender was much, much more prevalent in the early days of ChatGPT in 2022 and 2023. But by the time we had resolved the paper in 2025, there was parity and maybe even female names being more represented in the data.
Interesting.
Super interesting to see those demographic divides close. My sense is it's a function of both renewed attention on making sure we bridge these divides, but also the fact that when a product or service goes mass market, it can only do that if it reaches a diverse set of people. And so it's really important for technologists and product designers and economists to understand that scaling means accommodating diverse sort of cultures, preferences, points of view. And I think that's the story of ChatGPT.
And do you work with, experts like psychologists, social behavioralists, or whatever, to understand these phenomena?
Both internally and externally. And it's not really particularly on my team, but there are other folks inside OpenAI who are experts in the fields of ethics and psychology and sociology. And those folks are doing research to make sure that our products are aligned with where we want it to go in terms of benefiting humanity. Very, very important to have these perspectives. And we are, as an econ team, working with these folks as well on a set of projects and excited about it. So I think that's bringing in more disciplines and more of the social sciences and humanities is a really key to AI continue to grow in trust and also developing more research that lets people know its effects.
Interesting. And AI is really helping people not to save time on some of their tasks, or many of their tasks, and also in terms of quality, maybe to help, now, as you said before, complement expertise and so on. But how much of bot sitting and verification of AI outputs is really hindering these kind of efficiency improvements?
I think there's two aspects of this. One is what we found in the paper that we wrote last year, how people use ChatGPT. We found that a lot of the things people are using AI for, to get advice, to seek information, to express themselves, to streamline choices in their lives, financial choices, relationship choices, choices at work, they were not adding up to GDP because they were primarily consumer surplus. In the language of economics, it's like if I'm using ChatGPT to save time planning my child's birthday party or a family vacation, that doesn't show up in the productivity statistics.
Of course.
But it is creating a lot of consumer surplus for me. And so we're now seeking to quantify that consumer surplus a little more systematically.
Oh.
People have estimated outside OpenAI that it could be $90 to $100 billion a year just in consumer surplus. So that's one piece of the answer. The second piece, though, is your point about sort of what the weak links in AI adoption are, perhaps in enterprise. AI may allow me to produce more content. The question is, who's going to review that content? And so if that content is bottlenecked by a human manager or editor, then we aren't necessarily going to increase productivity without other changes. I think this is the best way to think about AI agents, for example, is perhaps not end-to-end, but middle to middle. There often is a human who's designing which projects to work with and how to allocate scarce compute. Then the middle to middle, the execution layer, AI is getting pretty good at that. But at the end, someone needs to discriminate between what good and bad code is, the quality level, and whether it's ready to ship. And I think at the end, a human is on that part too. And this is both, I think, how workflows will have to change, but also makes me optimistic about humans in the enterprise.
Yeah, and AI is very good, according to what you're saying, but also first-hand experience in helping in making choices.
Yes.
And I'm very passionate about financial literacy, and making choices in financial literacy is something very difficult. So what can AI do there for individuals, especially beginners? Because we already agreed, if you're at a certain level, AI is really great complement. It's a tool that really brings you to the next level. But if you're a beginner in financial literacy, what can AI do? Because can you really trust AI to start giving you financial advice, for example?
This is something I'm also really passionate about. I mean, we both know that making good financial choices based on evidence can be the difference between building wealth and having sort of a prosperous future versus facing economic challenges that are real. And that has implications for families, for government budgets, and everything that central bankers would care about too. I think that the ability to use AI to support decision-making is probably one of the most exciting things that's available right now in terms of AI benefiting humanity.
Yeah.
I think the key is to make sure that it's based on the right evidence and that it's advisory depending on the stage of development for the person. What might be a good investment for you may not be for me. You may be more experienced and savvy with how to manage investments than I, and we need to understand the user's preference in that. So picking up user signals is really important. Both inside OpenAI and I think all the labs, there's a focus on improving the models and their personality and behavior to address these kind of questions. So one of the things our team is really interested in internally is helping the research teams figure out what makes good financial advice, what makes good health advice, and contrasting that or comparing that to established benchmarks of quality. Now, to be fair, in some areas, there is a lot of disagreement over what high quality advice is. But in areas where you have a gold standard, the model can be trained against this standard. And organizations that are intermediaries can also build their own layer on top of it, which I think also has a lot of potential benefits. A lot of people may trust a name that they know to provide financial advice or healthcare. So intermediaries could build on OpenAI's models and provide that kind of information, that insight to people. I think if we can get this right, we can unlock a lot of potential. But of course, we have to make sure the information is sound. I'll also put in a plug for research. We should do research on how people are making decisions with AI, understand what outcomes they're getting, and then we can understand how to improve the models. And that's something for researchers, especially economists, but others who are watching to embark on.
And do we need lots of disclaimer in the meantime? Because before these kind of results materialize, people still seem to not rely a lot on AI, those who use it, of course. And what is the responsibility? You spoke about ethics before. It's super important. So what's your take there?
So being transparent about where the models are strong or weak, particularly in high-stakes decision-making, is key. I also think, though, that this is also going to be developed through experience, right? The more people are using this and sending us feedback to say, hey, this could be improved, and we have ways to take in user signals, we can improve this. This is the principle of iterative deployment. The idea that you put things out in the world, you get feedback, you improve them. Without that kind of feedback, we won't be able to improve some of these model behavior questions. And so I think it is important, and I think when people are using AI to make key decisions, they often should consult multiple sources and other humans too, because you might find out that you could be missing something.
Absolutely.
There are some decisions that are really private that it might be easier to talk to AI about than other people. And I think for that, we've opened up an opportunity for people to get information that they may have not gotten in the past. So I think that's an important margin also to think about.
Absolutely. And AI has a huge potential to increase efficiency and productivity and gains. Are workers going to benefit of these gains, or are they going to be concentrated in a few tech giants and investors?
This is something we have to get right, and it's not going to happen automatically. I think we have to have, from the lab perspective, from enterprise, from government, from civil society, in different parts of the world, have to come together to make sure this works. In general, the economic history of technology diffusion has been positive in terms of raising living standards and growth on the aggregate. But we know when you look underneath the hood and look at the microdata, there's been sort of technology shocks that have negatively affected particular areas, occupations, and those shocks, the legacy of those shocks can last a long time. So I think what we need to do is study the impact of AI on the economy as it's happening in real time. My team is trying to do that. Provide that information to decision makers. This can't be decided by one organization. It has to be through a democratic process. And so it's up to governments to come together with industries and others to help design what sort of response to the transitions that AI brings and how to do that.
So it's almost a call of let's talk.
I think so, although government, through the democratic process, will take the lead in trying to figure out how to sort of aid workers during transitions. I think based on the data we have, we don't know how large that's going to be, but we've identified a few professions that are more exposed than others to AI. I think for policymakers, they need a little bit of a shorthand to understand who do we focus on and which jobs. It's not all the jobs. In some jobs, you'll have complements to workers, and others are more likely to have substitutes. And that's where policymakers should focus. If we don't get this right, though, the promise of AI won't be realized. So this is something that goes far beyond me and my team, but has to involve a bunch of different stakeholders. But government's going to play a big role.
It's interesting because looking at governments, of course, this talk has to happen. But what do we say to individuals who fear, and this is what's happening at present? Lots of people fear, am I going to lose my job to AI? And what's the suggestion to them in terms of getting ready, enhancing your skills, or whatever your suggestion would be to be prepared and not to lose your job to AI?
For me, I can tell you what I say when I talk to people, and that's the best I can do is tell you. I don't know what the best answer is. I can tell you what my answer is. First, I think we have to have empathy. I'm an economist who studies the data at an aggregate level on employment. But before I start there, I need to make sure I understand the person who's asking me the question. If it's a student who's anxious about their job market prospects, a mid-career professional who's worried that AI is going to do a large part of their job and their employer will have less need for them. This is an issue we need to be humans about and empathize with and say, I understand why you're feeling the way you feel. It's really important not to skip that step. And I think that even when you're immersed in the data like I am and thinking about this as part of my job, that's really, really important. then you start to think about practical solutions that are really true in the absence of AI or in the presence of AI, which is what is the skill set needed to prepare for where the market is going. And we're already seeing a lot of workers figuring out how to work with AI to do their job better. And that's where my advice generally would be, right? Using AI can be really powerful in your workplace journey. There was a saying that people used to have with AI, which is like, it's more likely that someone who knows how AI works and uses it to take your job than AI to take your job. Because I think humans are going to be very relevant in the future of work, even with very powerful AI. The next thing you think about is which sectors are growing.
Yeah.
And this might require sort of more significant retraining or sort of licensing regimes to be streamlined to let people move into careers more quickly that are growing. In the US, we see healthcare growing as a part of the economy in terms of the job market. That's not surprising to me. As societies get richer, as they grow, they spend more on healthcare. And healthcare delivery and education delivery are things that we tend to prioritize human involvement and things I think that will continue to be very human-centric going forward, despite powerful AI. And I think when you think about humans in those sectors, we have to figure out what jobs exist there and how to make them really good jobs. You know, I think in Europe, there's a big debate over manufacturing jobs versus service jobs and how to make sure that service jobs are as good as manufacturing jobs. A lot of policy will have to be focused there as well, because I think a lot of the growth could be in sectors that require those transitions. And I think we both know a lot about the challenges in retraining workers, especially depending on age and education levels. And so we need to figure out a way to unlock retraining to make it as effective as possible, and also strengthen the social safety net wherever we can to help people in the in-between. It won't be easy, and it's not something that is should be talked about sort of in a casual way. I think it really is going to take a lot of work on the policy side and also in organizations so we can provide the best information on how the technology is evolving. That's my hope as we sort of encounter these really difficult challenges.
We are all in it.
Yes.
I'm curious about something you said about students, and I'm just curious about it. You've been teaching. I don't know if you still teach. What do you recommend to your students about AI? I mean, how do you make sure they just don't do your assignment using AI and develop their own skills? Because as you said before, when you're at a level, then you can really be powerfully cooperating with AI.
Yeah, I mean, there's two bits to this. One is how I deal with it as a teacher in a classroom, and the other is how I give career advice. I'm not teaching full-time now, but the last time I was teaching, ChatGPT was very much a thing, and I was interested in changing the way I assessed my students to make sure that they actually learn the material. So what I did in that class, and I teach MBA students, so I won't say that this applies to K-12 or undergraduate students. Happy to talk about that more later, but I have more experience teaching MBA students. I said, look, using AI at work is a reality. You know, the AI that you've used during your summer internship, that's the worst it's ever going to be. It's just going to get better and better and better. So for me to ignore that as part of your work here, I think would be closing my eyes to the job you're going to do. And because MBAs are professional degrees, preparing people for a job in an enterprise typically, I felt it was good from a pedagogical standpoint to incorporate AI. The next thing, though, is I still want to figure out if you learned what you learned, because maybe one of your employers is going to call me and say, is this person someone I should hire? Did they learn what they learned, right? And I think in that sense, the way I designed the assignment was I gave them a business memo to write. I ran it through ChatGPT, and I said, here's what ChatGPT had to say. And I provide to every student in the class. And I said, look, if you're going to use AI, please cite it. Tell me the prompt you use and attach the output.
Good.
But at least we all have the baseline for what chat can do.
Let's be honest.
Let's be honest. And I'm going to pick a few of you to present your output in an oral presentation to the entire class. This reflects if my manager called me up and said, Ronnie, you sent me this beautiful Slack message with all these amazing bullet points and detail, but could you summarize it for me and tell me what I really need to pay attention to?
What does it say?
So if I'm a person who just generated that with AI, my boss is not going to be very happy with me. So I think that this goes down to my advice about what I teach students, right? We're going to have to change how we teach and how we assess, but students are also going to have to focus on some of these human skills that, to be frank, were important all along. It's ironic, but the rise of AI might make humans even more important, and what makes us human might be the secret sauce, which is, can you present your work and persuade someone to go along with you, not just based on the text of what AI might have produced? Can you delegate responsibility and get works done with a team, or are you going to rely on AI only to delegate? And can you basically lead in an organization, which AI is not going to be able to replace your ability to do that. These are things that we should be teaching in business schools anyway. It's a huge part of the education, but I think that's what we'll have to focus on. So I'm hoping to encourage my students to focus on those very human skills, noting the anxiety that they have about a job market that's changing very fast. And I think we all have to do this with some humility and grace. No one has all the answers. No one can point a direction and say, definitely do this and you'll be okay. We just try to provide people with a bunch of different strategies and iterate as the evidence changes.
And you have children.
I have 3 kids, yeah.
And what do you tell them about AI?
It's interesting. So I have younger children who are just starting to encounter some of this in school. And my children have a very sort of binary view of it. They feel like they need to do their own work, which I really appreciate. And they're not very comfortable with using AI in their assignments because they've been told that it's not the right thing to do in many cases. And they're also not sure about attribution, how to say, well, this was my idea versus AI. And this is where I think it's a very big challenge for teachers. And I empathize. My mother was a teacher. And so how do we give students the right incentives to both use AI when they should, but be honest about how they used it and not outsource their cognitive sort of process to it? Very challenging. My sense tends to be, as a person who's not an educator for the K-12 level, but just a parent, we probably introduce AI the same way we introduced calculators.
Yes.
You don't use calculators when you're a little kid, hopefully, because you need to learn your simple maths, right? And when you get to a certain point, the simple math that you've hopefully mastered is a building block to doing other more complicated math. And if you had to waste your time doing all the math by hand, you could never get to the really complicated math. And so in some sense, that's when the calculator comes in. Same thing with a graph. You might start with a graph paper and draw the graph and the axis, but at some point you have a graphing calculator or you use a computer to draw graphs. And so I think that AI should be thought about like this. When do we introduce it? I think any educator will tell you it's unlikely that AI is all good or all bad. It's more likely that under some conditions, AI can facilitate learning, thinking, and doing. And in some conditions, the cost outweigh the benefits. We got to figure out where those are.
Absolutely. I'm just curious, do you ever in your prompts ask please and say thank you to AI?
There's a big discussion about this because some people think that that's inefficient from so many standpoints. I tend to talk to ChatGPT the way I would talk to a coworker or a friend. Sometimes I'll lose my patience if I asked it to do something a bunch of times and it didn't do it well, which maybe my coworker would feel the same thing. But I still remember when my kids were very young and we had an in-home device to play music, and they would yell at that device, and they'd yell the name really loud, and I'd say, this is not the way you talk to a human. And I thought, gosh, I really have to model how I deal with humans in the way I deal with AI. So at least for me, it might not be efficient as an economist, but I'm pretty polite to ChatGPT.
Okay, interesting. And let's talk a moment about the future, because AI tools are very powerful already now. But if we project ourselves 5, even 10 years ahead, we can imagine that this power is just going to increase. And the question is, what would you like to see happening so that this power can really produce wide-based benefits and not just a tech boom that is going to benefit a few?
This is the question. And it's the question, what I find so interesting about this, it's just not just the question at the ECB, at the Fed, at all the governments around the world. It's also the question inside OpenAI. Our mission is to sort of develop AGI to benefit all of humanity. All of humanity needs to flourish if we're going to get this right. It's not easy, and it's going to be difficult along the way with many, many different decisions. But this is something we all need to work on. When I think about what I'd like to see, first is as AI gets more powerful, I want to make sure that human values are in the driver's seat. We have to make sure that we're aligning what humans want with how AI is developing. And that is going to work through the democratic process, through lots of sectoral consultation, through multilateral work. That has to happen. The second thing is I want AI to free us up to do the things we want to do, not necessarily sort of make it harder for us to exhibit agency. And that will require us developing more measures of that. Right now, we have time use surveys, we have notions of leisure, we have ideas of agency. I think we need to get tighter on measuring some of the things around human flourishment, which are sometimes hard to measure, admittedly. But it's important to track those things and make sure that capable AI is also conducive to increasing human agency. And finally, thinking about inequality in wealth and income and opportunity is another sort of aspect to look at. If the returns to capital outstrip the returns to labor in a way that some are predicting, sort of reforming the way we think about fiscal policy and even monetary policy will be required to accommodate really fast advances in technology. So those are all things that we have to get right. It's not just going to be one organization, certainly not one individual, but it will be the challenge of the generation and something I'm excited to do a small piece to help.
You're ready for that?
Well, I'm ready. I'm ready because I think that we all need to work on it. I don't have any illusion that it's going to be easy, and my role is small, but I want to do the best I can because it is the central question.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, we're almost close to the end of this episode. At this point, we always ask our guests for a hot tip for our listeners. What do you have today?
I would say that agentic AI is an area that people outside the industry maybe haven't yet seen the benefits of, and maybe haven't been able to utilize to the fullest extent. I use Codex a lot. Codex is our agentic product. So you can think about a harness that controls a model and it can go do things on your behalf. So rather than asking a chatbot for information and taking it back, you're sending and delegating work to an agent who can go do it on your behalf. Huge difference. This is sort of the third step in the play, the third act in the play, I guess. It started off with a chatbot, ChatGPT, that has now reached more than 900 million users a week, and then it ended up in reasoning models, which were actually asking the models to think harder during the inference to get better answers, so that improved the quality of the answers. That was a big innovation. And now we're at agentic AI, where you can truly delegate. And I think we just wrote a paper on this that came out last week on how people inside OpenAI are using Codex, our agentic product. And what we find is it started off in the research and engineering orgs, but moved very rapidly to the non-technical parts of the organization. Economic research, which sadly for the economists listening, we're a non-technical part of the org in this study. Data science, recruiting, finance. So I think in your organization, if it's the technical people are already using agentic AI, it's probably coming to your part of the organization next. It took a matter of months at OpenAI. It could take a little longer, but I think it's something that should be on people's radar. You're going to be able to delegate a longer horizon tasks to agentic tools. To give you an example, in our study, 70% of the users of Codex were delegating a task that took more than 1 hour, which is amazing. And actually, 25% or a quarter were delegating tasks that took more than 8 hours to do. So these are long horizon tasks that are being delegated. And if you think about someone doing 8 hours of work with Codex, and you can spin up multiple agents, that's something, a tip, I think, to try to figure out how to use that in your workflow. Because what OpenAI people are doing today, a lot of enterprise will be doing tomorrow. And I think that's really key in terms of using Codex and agents at work.
Thank you, Ronnie. It was great having you, and thank you for joining us at Euro Matters.
Thank you for being here. It's good to see you.
You've been listening to Euro Matters with Stefania Secola. If you like what you've heard, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and leave us a review. In the spirit of Europe, I'd like to close in Portuguese today and say até a próxima. Until next time, thanks for listening.